Welcome, everyone. We're so happy you're joining us today. I would like to introduce our very special guest, Ismana Carney. Ismana Carney is a consultant, author, speaker, and facilitator of earth-based rights. In addition to her PhD in depth psychology, Ismana holds a Master's of Art in World History focused on comparative world faiths, mysticism, and indigenous spirituality. She is the author of 2 books, Women's Ways with Fire, Transforming Self in the Heart of Nature, and Sacred Laws, Spiritual Healing and Doctoring Songs, which presents the spiritual and cultural legacy left to her by her spiritual mother and renowned spiritual doctor of the Kashaya people, Bernice Torres. Ismana has also produced award-winning documentary films such as We Pray with Tobacco and The Iron Lodge, Native American Spirituality Behind Bars. Ismana has actively developed ongoing relationships with Indigenous individuals and communities across North America. As a result, she has been invited into an ever-deepening participation and engagement with their cultural and spiritual traditions. Ismana Carney, it is a great joy, honor, and pleasure to have you here with us today. Welcome.
Thank you, Barbara. It's an honor for me too. I'm so excited to be able to share my experiences and share my knowledge with a like-minded community, which is always in and of itself a joy. And so I'm really pleased to be here.
Thank you, Ismana. So as we are here at the Shift Network's Shamanic Wisdom Summit, let's begin in the field of shamanic wisdom. And I'm wondering if you could share with us today, what is a shamanic state of mind?
A shamanic state of mind, from my perspective and my experience, is fundamentally and first and foremost an earth-centered and an earth-referenced state of mind. So in order to begin to develop a shamanic state of mind, or even sort of think about yourself in that way, what would your lens of understanding be? How would you perceive your everyday lived reality from a shamanic standpoint? It has to ground itself in where are you with Earth Mother? Where are you in terms of your engagement and your relationship with and to this incredibly beautiful planet that we live on? This embodied being whose name we have named Earth, and she herself, as the spirit being she is, as we are spirit beings living in an embodied reality, which is our bodies, that we reflect and mirror that. And that as we care for our own bodies and hearts and spirits and minds, we need to also carefully pay attention to and give as much to her as we give to ourselves, to her health and well-being. So to keep our earth and keep the world in which we live, that we've been gifted to live, in mind through our daily, everyday activities. And that's what I'm going to emphasize in our conversation today, is that with the grounding in Indigenous shamanic traditions and world knowledge, the grounding has to be literally on the ground. So feet on the ground, on the body of this beautiful spirit, without which we would not exist. And within which we comprise the wholeness of her body, us and the trillions and innumerable other beings that live on her body, that go to make her body. From a Western standpoint, or another way of looking at it, is the planet upon which we walk. Without that, we would have to speak in other terms, in other mystical or religious traditional terms. With the shamanic state of mind, we're earth-centered. From another tradition, we may call the same set of practices or the same intention to deepen our soulful experience and connection with the world and our life. We might call it cultivating our God consciousness. We might call it, from a Buddhistic perspective, deepening our relationship with all beings. But in this case, since we're here to talk from a shamanic perspective, I'm using that term to honor the Shamanic Wisdom Summit and that trajectory. So yes, first and foremost, earth-centered and earth-referenced, deeply grounded in love and respect for the planet.
Beautiful. And along those lines, what is it to be a shaman or a shamanic practitioner versus being in a shamanic state of mind?
To be a shamanic practitioner, to take on that role, if we're honoring the original and ancient practice, shamanism is the oldest, most ancient of the spiritual practices and traditions among the human community. To be a shaman, honoring that legacy, is, by definition, you have to belong to the tribe. You have to belong to that indigenous community. Shamans are chosen from birth. Sometimes they're even prophesied in terms of their incoming moment onto the planet. They train their whole life. They are leaders in their community, acknowledged leaders. They are the culture bearers. They are the storytellers. They hold the history. They're doctors. They advise the chiefs and the warriors. And even still today, current native elders and current doctors, medicine people, spiritual leaders in the indigenous world, I don't know necessarily they would call themselves shamans. I mean, those tribes from which that term derives, which is, Northern European, it's a term that derives from them. But whether we could, in all good conscience, apply that term universally to world indigenous cultures and communities, I don't necessarily know that we can do that. But somebody not of that indigenous tradition, I'm not really sure how they do it. And because I'm not an expert in that, and this discussion for me is not about that, I'd rather look at the more abstract notion in terms of, well, so how would you follow a shamanic spiritual path and cultivate a shamanic state of being, a shamanic mindset? And what would that entail? How would that look?
Yes. So with that, how do you cultivate a shamanic state of mind?
I think that the first thing is, it has to do with continuing on what I started out with. It has to do with once your commitment is made, once you have that as a very concrete, visceral experience within yourself, walking out in the morning, to start your day, you walk out. And it's Earth you should be saying good morning to. It's my three sisters who happen to be my birch trees in the back of my garden here. Good morning, sisters. It's acknowledging the body of the being upon whom we are walking and functioning as the human species, and to keep that in mind, and by extension, understanding that her body being is made up of myriad beings, that then in a small personalized way, that you begin to relate to those myriad beings and form relationships with them. So the three birches in my garden are my three sisters, as an example. I have stones everywhere. They all have names. So I engage and I converse and I have a relationship with them. My uncle stone, my auntie piece of basalt. These are relationships, and we as human beings by nature have to usually, we personify everything that has meaning to us. We're getting farther away from that habit as we go into the 21st century and become super tech, etc. Go into this sort of very uber empirical, technologically material set of entities and set of items that we function through, right? However, we do have a tendency as human beings to go into relationship with whatever it is that's part of our purview of function, right? So in terms of nature and in terms of having a relationship and engagement with Earth, how do we talk to Earth? How do we formulate relationships? And part of that, once again, goes back to the indigenous ways of having relationship and going into relationship with Earth. And I'll talk about that a little bit more specifically when we come to some examples. But fundamentally, it's about how do you form, how do you cultivate and sustain active functional relationships with your natural world around you within which you live.
Beautiful. And where does that meet with this idea that when we're engaged with the drum or with a meditative and ecstatic praxis, that we are in a process of soul retrieval, in a process of collecting those pieces of ourselves that are kind of split off from traumas and things like that over time? How is it that this relationship can facilitate that kind of soul healing and retrieval that we're looking for in that shamanic moment?
What I'd like to do is go into sort of teaching story mode,
Yes.
which is quintessentially shamanic,
Okay.
and part of the indigenous practice is that your teachings come through story. Examples come through learning to use your senses. Teaching comes also through observation. It comes through repetition. It comes through cultivating patience, not necessarily as an abstract notion, but literally being able to sit for 8 hours and listen to a story. And going through the internal transformations that happen both on a transcendental level, but also in an incredibly sometimes challenging embodied level. So and those of our listeners who have the experience will know what I mean. Where you're in a prayer circle or you're in a teaching circle or in some kind of ceremonial event that you just simply don't leave. I mean, you don't break the circle. It's forbidden. And so you learn how to be there for 6 hours and you learn, I mean, you experience sort of depths of resource and strength that you may not have known you had, so, and in that process itself, once again, you're discovering yourself. And you're discovering your resources, your internal resources that in the everyday of life, we don't necessarily need to plumb. Life is quite comfortable for many of us at this time. And so as an example, and I want to focus on what I call simple disciplines. Because I think sometimes we take all of this into areas of complexity that are righteous in and of themselves, but not necessarily where the power move is, where the shamanic move is. And once again, in terms of one's personal experience and evolution, walking this particular path, understanding that there are many powerful and effective spiritual paths to take, all leading to the ultimate goal for the I always say we're a handful of human beings in the palm of a hand that are even interested in this stuff, let alone wanting to do the work involved, right? Luckily, there have been some miraculous human beings that have emerged from the palm of the hand, right? Socrates, Plato, Zarathustra, the Buddha, Lao Tzu, Confucius, right? We don't know anything about the prehistory giants in the world of spiritual change and shift, because there was, it wasn't recorded in that way. So we don't know many of the great giants who really shifted the world permanently, no looking back. After the Buddha, there was no looking back, as one example. So I'm going to focus on what I call simple disciplines, and I want to emphasize three particular areas or examples, let's say, storytelling. So one would be the power of the most simple statement turned into prayer, whose consequences can be cosmic for an individual. So, for example, I have been privileged to be invited to participate over many years with indigenous individuals and indigenous communities and ceremonies of various kinds. And so, as an example, this would be a sort of, once again, a simple way of illustrating this. So, in the Lakota Sioux tradition, these are tribes in the Dakotas. When you and this is a universal thing as well, but particularly in this example, when you're invited to a ceremony or a prayer circle, some kind of sacred event, you approach the sacred grounds upon which that event is going to occur. Once again, earth-centered, earth-referenced. The ground needs to be sacred to start with. The acknowledgement to Mother Earth needs to be established immediately and first. Then you're walking up to the sacred grounds, as an example. You come up to the entrance. Usually the entrance is into the east, not depending on the ceremony, but there's always a guardian. There's always someone there at that gate through which you walk, a metaphorical gate or an actual gate through which you walk, who has a feather, who has some sage burning or some cedar burning. If you're doing ceremony with indigenous communities from the south, they would be burning copal. This tradition of burning sacred incense and sacred herbs and substances is universal. So you walk up, you get feathered with the feather, the smoke is blown over you. Sacred smoke from efficacious plants known to be sacred. And in this way, you're purified and you're prepared to walk onto sacred ground. This is a lesson right there. In terms of our own shamanic growth, when we approach ourselves, for example, what you mentioned, a longing or a need or an intuitive sense that you have to, in some moment, delve deep into yourself to find inner resources or to find an aspect or facet of your being that you need to retrieve or recall. What do you do to prepare for that? In the indigenous and shamanic traditions, there are tools and ways and maps of how you prepare for inner work, for inner journeying, right? For psychological health, for whatever it is that you need to straighten out some very mixed up emotions in an incredibly mixed up moment, right? These are, when you're talking about inner or soulful encounters with yourself, shamanic teachings show us, take a breath, make a sacred space to do that. Take a breath. Do you have something special to cleanse yourself with? A song, a thought, a prayer, whatever your own personal paraphernalia is around all of that, right? Go take some time out, sit under a tree under your garden that you have a particular connection with. So there are ways and steps, and the thing with the shamanic process is that each step and each forward movement is included with a particular mindset and a particular behavior or function or activity that brings you into that sacred place to do the things that you need to do. So as you've gotten purified, moving onto the sacred grounds, you say this term in Lakota, it's Matako Oyasan, all my relations. And this is a term that translates, as I said, to all my relations and is used both as an ordinary term. I'm heading out with all my relations. We're going to Saturday night. We've got a party going on. There's a barbecue. Or you turn that, if it's in a sacred context or a prayerful context, you turn that statement into a prayer of great power, depending. And so once again, the lesson there, the teaching there is this moving back and forth. And everyday reality can become a spiritually powerful and evocative moment or statement, etc. So when you go onto the grounds and you've been cleansed, the cleanser, the purifier, that person who's blessing you, will end the blessing with Ometako Oyasan. The implication there is that I have not only prepared you to enter the sacred grounds, I have prepared all my relations along with you to enter sacred grounds. And then you yourself, moving onto sacred ground, say Ometako Oyasan. And that means, thank you, I have been prepared to think with the truth, to see with the truth, to hear with the truth, to speak with the truth. Now I'm prepared to move into the sacred space. And on behalf of all my relations, I come onto this sacred space. So that from the shamanic and indigenous mindset, there is this profound inclusion constantly of functioning. It can be translated in ordinary, everyday experiences as well. But before I go there, also want to say that, where the power of the simple term is, then when you go into your prayer circle, and everyone is invited to make their prayer, right? So you make your prayer, and at the end of your prayer, you end it with Ometako Oyasan. I have made my prayer not only on behalf of myself, but on behalf of all my relations. Remember, in Buddhism, in Taoism, all beings have been included. And then the person next to you begins their prayer. And so there's practical and there's transcendent functions to this term. So for the person who's in prayer, that function of that term is that their prayer time is protected, because the person next to you doesn't start their prayer until they've heard you say Ometako Oyasen. And what this does is multiple things in terms of sacred space, or let's say shamanic space, right? And it can be in a group situation or internally within yourself, is that your prayer space is protected because no one can interrupt you. No one interrupts you. If in the moment of your prayer, you have a moment where you're overcome, or there's some kind of amazing insight that hits you, and so you're silent for a moment, maybe an extended moment, that moment is protected because no one can interrupt you. And so, so you have that protection. Another level of that is in terms of holding sacred space for each other, so that human sharing and mutual respect, is that the individual next to you understands that they're respecting your prayer, and vice versa. You're respecting that person's prayer. But collectively and together, you're working with your ceremonial leader to help he or she to maintain the integrity of the sacred space. So the idea and the notion of interruptions and, jumping in when you're not supposed to, all of that, you're protected from that. And so you're living a system of mutual respect, right? And this all comes from that shamanic indigenous platform of behavior and love for each other. I mean, ultimately, it comes down to the ground of love. And so we'll take it to a more ordinary sort of everyday level. And I call it a simple discipline, which I started for myself. I have several simple disciplines. I started for myself many years ago. Um, and it's where I use that word, mitakoyasen, as a simple discipline of spiritual activity, of spiritual exercise. And so one of the things, from a traditional standpoint, from let's say the old ways, is that walking the spiritual path was not and is not an easy thing. It's not an easy thing. You don't get dressed up. You don't go and listen to somebody say some good words and go get brunch. I mean, it just does not work that way. It's hard work. Sometimes it's dangerous work. It taxes you. And like our bodies, our hearts, and minds, our spirit needs gym as well. It needs to be exercised. And so I call these simple disciplines exercises for spirit. So with Mitakuya-sen, the story around that goes that I live in an area relatively rural, like you do, where you're constantly seeing roadkill on the roads. Coyotes and raccoons and squirrels and possums and hawks and owls, and they're all there on the road. And I would of course notice and feel a sort of little heart piece and then carry on, right? This is the result. This is the fallout of one of the areas of fallout of human presence on the planet to other beings, right? So one day I was driving along and a coyote had been killed. And coyote is one of my totemic community spirit animals. So I screeched to a halt, backed off, parked, ran back with some sacred herbs that I have in my car at all times for those kinds of occasions, and put my hands on that coyote. It was still warm, so was a recent kill. Sprinkled the sacred herbs and said a prayer. And I sang a song. And the coyote, I could feel its spirit start to leave. It was warm, so spirit was still in there. I could feel the spirit start to leave. And then I heard a teaching from the coyote for me. Please do this with Mitako Oyasen for every one of us that you see who has lost their life on the road. And this is what will happen. Like laying a shawl or a blanket on a loved one who's died, your Omitako Oyasen will have the energy to do that and lay a blanket or a shawl on that relative. And that was such a gift to me. It never ceases to move me when I tell that story. But since then, that's what I've done. So there's not one roadkill that goes by that is an immediate Omitako Oyasen. Constantly, thousands of Omitako Oyasens. But the point that I want to make is that, this is in the everyday life, right? And these are shamanic cultivating activities that we can do to spiritualize our everyday life, right? And so now it's not something that, I have to think about. It's I call it automatic sacred. It's, it's like breathing. I mean, we don't think about breathing in oxygen and exhaling carbon dioxide, right? We do, we just live it, we understand peripherally, consciously that that's what we do. So it's the same. I could be in a car with you and having a conversation and see a hawk down and I would, Omadako Yasan. You wouldn't know, but that, that hawk knows. So that would be one example of taking something, very relatively simple, turning a two-word phrase into, a magnificently powerful prayer. And have it become part of your everyday literally your everyday reality, no matter what it is that you're doing. So I'd like to sing that song that I sang for that coyote. And I don't sing it with every relative that's lost their life, but if I have to stop and really do something more extensive, I will sing it. Ometakuye oyate, ometakuye oyate, ometakuye oyate, ometakuye oyate. Wea, 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 ometakuye oyate, ometakuye oyate, ometakuye oyate, ometakuye oyate. So I'd like to move on to another simple discipline that once again came as a gift from my Indigenous teacher. We were together one day. We were recording some of her knowledge for ultimately what turned into the book that Barbara mentioned. And the conversation came up about altars, about sacred space, and how important actually setting the sacred space with its heart being an altar. And so as we were having the conversation, my teacher began to talk about her spiritual altar or her spirit altar, and how her mother had gifted her with a song and the process whereby she could travel within herself and find the space and the place to create sacred ground within herself, to then establish a spirit altar, which is a permanent presence within her. And as we were discussing this, she talked about how in our inner body, I call my inner sort of reality the inner geography of my soul, or the inner landscape of my soul. So that's my terminology. But Bernice talked about that there's a very specific area in the body reflecting that place, where spirit comes to meet you, where when you call on spirit or holy beings, that's where the meeting happens. Your visions come through there, your visionary dreams come through there, your insights and revelations come through there. When you need to call on the sacred, that's where you go. You may not be conscious of that, but that's where you go. And so Bernice pointed, I said, well, where is that? And she pointed to her solar plexus. And she said, that is where the spirit comes when you call the spirit. And that's where I built my altar, and that's where you build your spirit altar, which is like a home or a beacon or magnet to bring in the sacred presence. So her mother sang her an altar song, and then Bernice journeyed in and spent her time looking for and finding all kinds of symbolic items and materials with which to build her spirit altar, of course, with spirit items and spirit materials. And when she was done, she gave a bodily sign to her mother, and then her mother finished up the altar song, and then asked Bernice, so tell me about your experience. And Bernice proceeded to tell her mother in detail about her journey and the altar that she'd built. And then her mother sang a finishing song or a completion song, which then, in a sense, set the permanency of that altar for Bernice. So as we were having the conversation, Bernice was sort of looking at me sharply with her her doctoring eyes. And I was like, oh no, she's looking at me that way. Anyway, so I knew what was coming. She said, well, so Ismana, are you ready for your spirit altar? You know, one of the things you learn when you're working with indigenous spiritual people, and especially if you have a close relationship with them, that there's certain looks and there's certain ways of saying things that you cannot refuse. I mean, there's no discussion involved. And that's what I mean, where this path is not necessarily an easy path. Anyway, so of course, I said yes. You know, I would be so privileged and honored. So we made a date for that to happen, and of course, you know, as I mentioned before, we had to prepare me, so in my teacher's tradition, she smoked her sacred pipe. She put in angelica root flakes, and then smoked the pipe, and then blew that smoke all over me, once again to prepare me and get me ready. And then she sang her altar song. And I immediately began to travel, and went, you know, into myself, and found that area, and began to create my altar. And she sings the song for as long as it takes. Finally, when I was done, I made the bodily sign that she wanted me to make to show her I was finished, so she could wrap up the song and then I could come out. And then once again, we repeated it. She asked me exactly what I did and what my altar was, and all of that. And then she sang a song to seal that up, and to finish it. So I have my altar now. My spirit altar has been with me for a long time. And every morning, as part of my simple discipline, during my prayer and meditation, I revisit my altar. Every morning I go into my spirit altar, and there I place all my hopes for the day, my prayers for the day. If I need to call in spirit helpers because something is brewing that I need to be prepared for, or there's some challenge I need to deal with. All of that happens in spirit, in that deep place. And sometimes if it's just to celebrate the beauty of the day, as I've been saying, the first act always is the placing of gratitude and praise giving to Creator, to Earth Mother, and all holy beings. At the get-go, the foundation is that, the praise, the thanksgiving, the setting down of a foundation of love before the move to, and here's what I need. I've received my own altar song, which Bernice approved of, and so I sing my way in and I sing my way out with that altar song. So this is something that then you know, you can do, and you know, those visiting our conversation, this is something that you can do in whatever ways according to your practice, etc. So I want to gift you with my altar song, because I'm able to do that. Many of these sacred songs are not to be shared and are not to be gifted. But I have my own song and I'm happy to gift it. So those of you listening, if you would want to have an experiential moment with the song, please close your eyes and go into your meditative breathing state and open yourself. My teacher would always say that the song is like our bodies are to our spirit. The song is the embodiment of the spirit that resides within it. And that spirit is a living entity. It can move out, it can touch you, and it can visit you. So if you feel that, please go ahead and open yourself to that. If not, this is a song that's gifted to you. And I'll be using a traditional instrument. And just wanted to qualify by saying Indigenous songs are not hymns. Indigenous songs are not like a lovely meditative New Age musical piece. They're not to bring you into some sort of quiet, mellow situation, which is why Indigenous leaders and spiritual people talk in terms of power. Here, the power on this song. And so the songs are filled with power, the power of lightning and thunder and the movement of the earth and the weight of gravity. And so just wanted to give you that, in case you wondered, whoa, that's strong. But that is how those songs are. And I travel with my songs, so I will close my eyes too. And sometimes that spirit takes some time to come. So just wait. Patience. Weya cho mai o hape chape. 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 Dui chap te hap te hoya. 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 Hey, 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 hey. Hey, 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 hey. Weya cho mai o hap te chap te. 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 Dui chap te hap te hoya. 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 Hey, 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 hey. Woo.
Ismana, what an incredible offering. What an incredible blessing that song is. Thank you for sharing that with us. And this is one of those songs and one of those sessions that we can continue to come back to over and over again in order to connect with that sacred space, that sacred, truly sacred place within.
Thank you. So I have one more story teaching to change the dynamic. And once again, this is about, how we cultivate and evolve into our shamanic self. So I want to just sort of take us into a prayer circle. So And we're going to honor the willow tree and the willow medicine. And I'll finish with a willow song for everyone. So the willow tree is a gift-giving tree. I'm sure we all have that notion of the eternally gift-giving tree. The gift that the willow gives, or the gifts that the willow give, are from absolute transcendent, visionary, prophetic wisdom, down to the inner bark of the red willow and the aspirin that lies in there to help with pain, which is how we discovered aspirin. So from the inner bark of the red willow, and we're talking about willows that stand by the riverbank, although all willows share many attributes. So the red willow, the medicine, it's smoked in the Chanupawakan, the sacred pipe. It's used for medicinal purposes. The willow branches give us their leaves, the leaves, which I'll talk about in a minute, but give us the branches, give us the material with which we create our sacred spaces. The Inipiwakan, the purification ceremony, the sweat lodge ceremony is built from willow. So I wanted to share a beautiful ancient teaching about willow and moon woman. And I'm going to dedicate this to the women who might be listening and being part of this conversation. So imagine that we've built a small little structure with willow branches, a circular structure within which we sit in a circle, and we'll have a teaching on the willow. So the teaching would start always, of course, with the greeting and the placement. Great Spirit, Sacred One, Earth Mother, all holy beings, we welcome you and we thank you for bringing us here today. We want to acknowledge these sacred willows and the branches that they've offered to us, that they've sacrificed their lives so that we could create the sacred space within which we can come together to pray. And to acknowledge within our prayer the beautiful relationship, as ancient time can be, between the willow people, the willow nation, and moon woman, Hinhapiwi, moon woman. And for moon woman, we know and we acknowledge the relationship and celebrate the relationship that for moon woman, willow is her tree. Beyond and above all tree people, the willow is moon woman's tree. And the willow loves water more than any other tree on this beautiful body of Earth Mother. And the moon is the caretaker of all the waters of the world. Moon woman is a water spirit. Her light is the spirit of water. Her moonlight, her silvery moonlight, is the spirit of all the waters. The waters breathe in the light of moon woman as we breathe in oxygen. They reflect back to moon woman her own light as we exhale our carbon dioxide. Water and moon woman breathe each other and breathe into each other. And the willow drinks and breathes her light. Her light lies in the silver of the willow leaf. When the willow leaf shines and glitters with silver, it's the moonlight that it's breathed in and absorbed in. And the mystery teaching, the sacred teaching for the women in the circle, bringing in moon woman and willow, is that if we are open, if we open within ourselves to that shamanic place, that shamanic core, that core that's searching always in how to sacramentalize our lives, make our moments in life a sacrament, if we open ourselves to that, and we open ourselves to the silver in the willow leaf, that energy, that silver light from the moon through the willow will go into our throat, will go into our voice, will go into our speaking beings, and we will be able to speak with the words of a prophet. We'll be able to speak prophecy. We'll be able to untangle the most deeply tangled heart. We'll be able to unconfuse the most confused mind. We'll be able to heal our brokenness. We'll be able to go in and fuse the scars and the wounds that we have. We'll be able to set right a soul that's set wrongly. A soul that's moving toward the darkness can be turned around by the silver in the moon and her light and brought back out toward the light. So these are the teachings that come with Moon Woman and Willow people when we come together. So in the shamanic cultivation, the shamanic state of mind, we can go into from the most mundane, the searching along the riverbank for the right-sized willow branches to cut and to bring and to dig the holes and put the sacred herbs in there and put the willow in and tie them up. From that level of, once again, still peripherally conscious of the fundamental, the depth of the sacred act we're doing within the context of a very mundane act, all the way into going into the prayer circle and taking that to a transcendental level of wisdom, of shamanic wisdom. So I'm going to sing you the Willow song. And please, once again, close your eyes. Take yourself, it's a traveling song, so take yourself to the riverbank and take yourself walking through the stands of willow as the waters go by. And think about Moon Woman. Inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone. Inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone. Shanu hoya, shanu hoya, inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone. Shanu hoya, shanu hoya, inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone, inehiya hoya hone. Shanu hoya, shanu hoya, shanu hoya.
In this space is Mana Karni that you've created, this deep regard, this deep respect, this deep calling in of the shamanic state of mind. Mana, thank you so much for your respectful approach to the field of shamanism, to the sacred spirit, to all of those things that work on behalf of the Creator, as we call them in and ask them to heal with us from the inside out with this beautiful Mother Earth that we hold sacred today in this session, and the beautiful songs that have come through you, this gift that you've given us today. So grateful and so deeply touched by your work. Is there anything else that you would like to give to our listeners today or offer that would take them to their next step or their next recognition of their work in this way?
I would like to encourage anyone who's interested in developing and cultivating a shamanic state of mind, a shamanic state of being, to really look at their own personal purview of life experience and your everyday, and begin step by step finding a simple discipline, your own simple discipline. I've described some of mine. And everyone's welcome to move there, but to find your own simple discipline that you can do every day, that has both the spiritual practice involved. I see many hundreds of roadkill a week. So there's a practice involved, an ongoing practice. And to then stay with that practice, whatever it may be, until it becomes automatic. So don't take on too much. That's not the shamanic way. Shamanic way is a way of life that one lives and walks throughout one's life. So find one simple discipline, whatever it may be, and stay with that simple discipline. Make sure that from a shamanic perspective, it's grounded in literally serving and engaging with and offering the gift back to Earth Mother. That Matakriya Sen for the roadkill is offering that life back to Earth Mother. So that simple discipline should incorporate that. And then once it becomes automatic, and you'll know, oh, I'm not thinking that anymore. I call it developing your peripheral consciousness. You're completely conscious and aware, but it's peripheral as you're doing everything else you need to do in your everyday life. But you've got this sacred and spiritual, keeping the sacred in mind activity. And then they grow on each other. As soon as one's become automatic, look for your next automatic sacred, and then begin to practice that. And the depth and the power of the transformation that comes with those simple steps is lasting. It's lasting. It's not a two-day intensive. You know, and you come out, and you know, these are lasting, completely impregnated in your soul activities. And so that's what I'd like to leave everyone with. Start humble. It is the indigenous and it is the ancient ways. Start humble.
Mana Carney, thank you so much for joining us today. I'd like to thank all of our listeners also for joining us today. We look forward to coming back to this session over and over again for these deep teachings. Mana, thank you.
Thank you so much.